So, I want to start today off with a riddle for you.
Oh boy. Okay, let's hear it.
Think about how we typically measure, like, the success of a country. We look at the economy, we look at the overall standard of living, and then we rank them, top to bottom.
Right, exactly. Like a global leaderboard.
Exactly. So here's the riddle. How does a country that is ranked 113th in the world suddenly leapfrog dozens of other nations? I mean, literally jumping 49 places in the global rankings overnight without its economy actually changing at all.
I mean, honestly, it sounds like an accounting error.
Mm.
Or maybe someone is just completely manipulating the spreadsheet.
Right, that was my first thought too. But the answer isn't a glitch. It actually requires changing the very definition of what it means for a human being to be, quote unquote, successful.
Ah, I see where you're going with this.
Yeah, because today we're looking at this massive stack of data you sent us. You, the listener, handed us this incredible deep dive into a country that is quietly, I mean almost invisibly, completely rewriting the rules of global development.
Yeah, the document you provided is the Gabon Human Development Deep Dive Report. And it specifically focuses on green growth and equity challenges.
And you didn't just send over a quick summary. I mean, you gave us 3 full decades of United Nations metrics. It's just a mountain of data.
It really is a phenomenal data set. We're looking at this entire alphabet soup of global development tracking, right?
Yeah.
You got the HDI, the GDI, the GII, the IHDI, the MPI, the PHDI.
It's so many acronyms.
It is, but what is so compelling about this specific data is that it fundamentally breaks the traditional equation that we are all taught in basic economics classes.
How so?
Well, we're taught that more wealth just automatically equals more advancement. It's supposed to be a straight linear path. But Gabon's numbers prove that traditional economic indicators, they actually severely underestimate the true quality of a nation's development.
While at the same time sort of hiding these deep underlying structural inequalities.
Exactly. It completely masks them.
So our mission today is to basically unpack this treasure map that you've given us, because hidden inside all these numbers is this fascinating story about the intersection of ecology and gender and wealth and human progress.
But to understand how this country jumps 49 places in a global ranking, we first have to understand the baseline.
Right. We have to look at the traditional foundational metric, which is the Human Development Index, or the HDI.
Right, the classic HDI. And the data you provided traces Gabon's trajectory from 1990 all the way up to 2023.
Yeah, so back in 1990, their HDI was 0.621, and as of 2023, it sits at 0.733.
Which represents a very steady climb. That's, roughly an 18% growth over 3 decades.
Okay, let me jump in right there and play devil's advocate for a second.
Go for it.
18% growth over 30 years actually sounds, I don't know, kind of slow. I mean, if you look at economies like South Korea or Singapore over a 30-year span, they completely transform their entire societal structure.
That's a very fair point.
So is 18% really a massive win, or is that just like the baseline global inflation of living standards? Because going from 0.621 to 0.733 over an entire generation, it doesn't exactly sound like a rocket ship taking off.
Well, it's a great critique, but it really requires us to look at how the HDI is actually constructed. It is not just a measure of GDP.
Okay.
Because if it were just money, you could easily double or triple it in a few decades with a massive oil boom. But the HDI is basically an engine with 3 distinct parts that all have to fire together.
And what are those 3 parts?
You need a long and healthy life, you need access to knowledge, and you need a decent standard of living. When you improve one, say, income, the index only moves so much if the other 2, health and education, don't keep pace.
Oh, I see. So a huge spike in just money won't drastically move the needle if people are still uneducated and, well, dying young.
Exactly. Furthermore, there are diminishing returns. Moving a population from, say, 0 schooling to 5 years of schooling is relatively easy.
Right, you just build some primary schools.
But moving them from 9 years to 14 years, that requires a massive structural overhaul of your entire university system. So while 18% isn't an Asian tiger-style economic miracle, it represents a society that is undeniably building real capacity generation after generation.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. And your data actually points out that 2013 was this major milestone for them.
Yes, 2013 was huge.
That was the year Gabon officially crossed the 0.707 threshold, which moved them into the UN's High Human Development category.
Right. And for a country in Central Africa, achieving and maintaining that high human development status is incredibly significant.
Yeah, it's a big deal.
But getting back to your point about the engine needing all its parts to fire perfectly, when we deconstruct those 3 specific pillars of the HDI, and compare them to the 2023 global averages, the engine starts to sound a little, well, strange.
Strange is an understatement, honestly. It looks wildly disjointed. Let's break down the three parts you just mentioned. First up is the standard of living, or income. Gabon's gross national income, or GNI, per capita. And your report specifies this is measured in 2021 purchasing power parity dollars is $18,854.
Let's actually pause and clarify what purchasing power parity, or PPP, means for the listener, because it's super crucial here.
Yeah, please do.
We aren't just taking the local currency in Gabon and converting it to US dollars at whatever the bank exchange rate is today.
Because that doesn't really tell you what the money buys, right?
Exactly. It doesn't tell you how well someone actually lives. PPP adjusts the number based on what money actually buys locally. It's kind of like the Big Mac index.
Oh, I love that analogy. Explain that.
Well, if a burger costs $5 in New York but only $1 in Libreville, your dollar goes 5 times further there for that specific good.
Right.
So an $18,854 PPP GNI basically means the average citizen have the equivalent purchasing power of someone making about 19 grand in the U.S.
Which is pretty solid on a global scale. I mean, the world average is just over $20,000. So they are right there, swinging with the global middle class. They definitely have wealth.
Correct. They have the money. Now let's look at the second part of the engine, education.
Okay, let's look at the numbers.
The UN measures this in mean years of schooling for adults. In Gabon, it is 9.7 years.
And the global average is 8.8 years. So, I mean, they are out-educating the global average by almost a full year.
Exactly. They have decent wealth, and they have above-average education. But then we hit the third part of the engine, health.
Uh-oh.
Specifically, life expectancy at birth. In Gabon, it is 68.3 years.
Wow. While the global average is 73.4 years, they are lagging behind the rest of the world by 5.1 years. That is a massive gap.
It is a glaring systemic bottleneck.
I'm trying to visualize this. It's like looking at a high school student's report card, right? And the grades are just completely mismatched.
Yeah, how so?
Well, this student is acing AP Calculus. They are getting a solid B in economics, but they are completely spectacularly failing gym and health class.
That is a brilliant way to put it.
Because the overall GPA, which is the HDI in this case, it averages out to a decent high human development. But the actual breakdown makes no sense at all.
Right.
If a country has money and the people are educated enough to understand basic hygiene and medicine and public health, why are they dying half a decade earlier than the rest of the world?
That is the core paradox of Gabon's baseline data. It suggests that wealth generation and educational attainment are fundamentally disconnected from public health outcomes.
Like they aren't talking to each other.
Exactly. The money exists, the schools exist, but something deeply structural is preventing that development from keeping people alive. And understand why we can't just look at the population as a single giant monolith.
Because an average is just an average.
Precisely. We have to split the data. And the most revealing way to split it is by gender.
Which brings us to a part of your report that completely challenged my assumptions about developing economies. You introduced this metric called the Gender Development Index, or the GDI.
Yeah, the GDI is a brilliant metric. It measures the exact same 3 dimensions we just talked about, health, knowledge, and living standards. But it measures the disparity between women and men.
So it calculates like a female HDI and compares it to a male HDI.
Exactly. And a GBI value of exactly 1.0 means perfect parity. It means men and women are developing at the exact same rate.
And your data shows Gabon scores a 0.994.
Which is staggering. I mean, a 0.994 means they have achieved near-perfect gender parity in these basic development achievements. To put that in perspective for you, the global average for 2023 is 0.955.
So they are beating the world average comfortably. But honestly, the ranking is what really jumped out at me. Gabon ranks 43rd in the world for gender development.
Yep, 43rd.
Think about that for a second. Their overall human development rank is 113th. But when you isolate for gender parity, they shoot all the way up to 43rd.
It indicates that whatever development is happening in Gabon, whether it's slow or fast overall, it is being distributed remarkably evenly between men and women, at least in terms of basic access.
But it's not just quote-unquote even. When we look at the specific education data you provided, the parity actually inverts into a massive female advantage.
Oh, this is the best part.
I want to spend some time on this because this statistic is wild. Your report looks at the population aged 25 and older who have at least some secondary education. For men in Gabon, it's 56.9%.
Which is a respectable number for the region.
But for women, it is 71.6%.
That is arguably the defining statistic of their social development over the last 30 years.
Let's just pause on that. The women are outpacing the men by nearly 15 percentage points in secondary education. That's not a slight edge, that's a completely different educational reality.
Completely different.
For context, you noted the global average for women with some secondary education is 62.0%. So Gabon's women are absolutely crushing the global average, while the men are actually lagging behind it.
What makes this so fascinating is how incredibly unusual it is for a developing economy.
Really? Why is that?
Typically, when we look at historical UN data for developing nations, the educational advantage skews heavily male.
Oh, sure.
When a family has limited resources, or when a state has limited infrastructure, patriarchal norms usually dictate that boys are prioritized for secondary schooling. But in Gabon, women aren't just catching up to men. They are the core engine driving the nation's educational metrics upward.
Why do you think that is? Does the UN data explain why Gabon specifically managed to get so many women into secondary schools?
Well, the UN metrics themselves are diagnostic, not explanatory, so they tell us the what rather than the historical why.
Okay, fair enough.
But if we look at the broader context of urbanization and policy, a few things happen. Gabon is highly urbanized compared to many of its neighbors, and when populations move to cities, access to secondary schools becomes geographically easier for girls.
Because they don't have to travel long, potentially unsafe distances.
Exactly. Additionally, post-independence educational policies in many Francophone African countries heavily emphasized universal enrollment. But honestly, even with that context, a 15-point female advantage is extraordinary.
So from an economic and societal standpoint, what is the impact of this? I mean, obviously, educating anyone is good, but having a society where the women are vastly more formally educated than the men, that has to change the fabric of the country, right?
Oh, absolutely. In development economics, educating women is universally considered the single highest yield investment a country can make.
Yeah.
It creates this massive multiplier effect.
Like what? What kind of multiplier?
Educated women tend to have fewer, healthier children. They invest a significantly larger portion of their income directly back into their household's nutrition and health compared to men. They essentially drive community-level resilience.
But it also raises a really interesting sociological question, doesn't it? If you're a policymaker or even just a citizen living in Gabon, what happens to your society when the women hold all the educational power?
It creates a fascinating dynamic.
Does it shift household dynamics? Does it change who manages the finances? Or conversely, does it create a massive societal tension if the job market or the political system hasn't actually adapted to this highly educated female population?
That is the exact right question to ask.
No.
Because on paper, a near-perfect GDI and an incredible female educational attainment rate should theoretically translate into a booming, equitable, utopian society.
Right. Women are educated, the GDI is 0.994, everything should be fantastic.
But your data shows us that this just isn't the case. And to understand why, we have to look at a different index entirely. We have to pivot from measuring capabilities to measuring structural outcomes.
Okay, but wait. If women are out-educating men this thoroughly and the parity score is so high, my next logical assumption is that we're looking at an incredibly safe, equitable environment.
You would think so.
Women should be dominating the workforce and living long, healthy lives, but they aren't, are they? Where is all that educational potential actually going?
It is bleeding out through systemic failures. And we measure that using the Gender Inequality Index, or the GII.
This is where the numbers get really dark. Despite having a Gender Development Index rank of 43, Gabon's Gender Inequality Index rank plummets all the way down to 141st globally.
That's a massive drop.
Their GII value is 0.505, which is worse than the world average of 0.455. I don't understand. How can a country be 43rd in gender development but 141st in gender inequality? Isn't that a total contradiction? Are the UN's metrics just flawed?
It definitely sounds like a contradiction at first, but it actually highlights the genius of having multiple metrics. It proves the metrics aren't flawed. They are just measuring completely different phases of a human life.
Break that down for me.
Okay, so the GDI, where they rank 43rd, measures access and baseline capabilities. Can a girl get into a school? Can she access a clinic? The answer in Gabon is largely yes.
Okay.
But the GII, where they rank 141st, measures the loss in potential due to structural dangers and barriers in 3 specific dimensions: reproductive health, political empowerment, and the labor market.
So you can have all the access in the world, but if the structure of society is dangerous or exclusionary, you lose that potential anyway.
Exactly. You lose the capability.
And your data meticulously identifies the primary culprits driving this massive inequality. It really comes down to reproductive health.
Yes, it does. Let's look at the maternal mortality ratio, the MMR. In Gabon, it is 226.55 deaths per 100,000 live births.
That is heartbreakingly high. And your report notes the global average is 216.0, so they are worse than the global average, which is already a tragic baseline.
It is. But the second metric is even more indicative of the systemic trap these young women are falling into. It's the adolescent birth rate, or ABR.
Right.
This measures births per 1,000 women ages 15 to 19. Gabon's rate is 91.71.
91.71. For context, you pointed out the world average is 39.0. So Gabon's teen pregnancy rate is a staggering 2.3 times the global average.
Now, connect this back to the education data we just discussed. This is exactly why that 5.1-year gap in life expectancy exists.
Yeah, the health class failure.
Right. You have a society where girls are enrolling in secondary school at massive rates, but a high school enrollment rate cannot protect a young woman from a failing reproductive health infrastructure.
Think about the reality of a 16-year-old girl in this system. She might be sitting in a high school classroom right now. She is literally the embodiment of that incredible 71.6% education statistic.
Exactly.
She's doing her math homework, she's learning history. But if she lacks access to family planning or contraceptives or safe reproductive health care, a teenage pregnancy just completely derails her entire trajectory.
That's it, exactly. The capability was there, she was in school, but the structural outcome failed her. When an adolescent girl has a child, especially in a country with a really high maternal mortality rate, she is put at extreme physical risk.
And even if she survives the birth, her chances of actually finishing that education, entering the formal labor market, or accumulating wealth just drop precipitously.
Exactly. So it's basically a leaky pipeline.
Oh, that's a perfect way to describe it. We are pouring all this incredible educational potential, all this cognitive capital from these young women into the top of the pipe.
Yeah.
But a massive maternal health crisis and an astronomical teen pregnancy rate are acting like gaping holes in the metal. They are just draining that human potential out of the system before it ever has a chance to reach the broader economy or translate into long-term political empowerment.
Leaky pipeline is the exact right analogy. You are building the capacity, but you aren't protecting the individual. The health infrastructure is actively failing the very women that the education infrastructure is uplifting.
Which is just so frustrating to see in the data.
It is, and this is exactly why we see that bizarre life expectancy gap. Women who should be living into their late 70s or 80s are succumbing to preventable reproductive health complications in their teens and 20s.
Which is obviously a tragedy on a human level, but also a massive self-inflicted wound on a macroeconomic level.
Unquestionably.
Which leads us directly to the next part of your data stack, the power gap and the missing workforce. If the pipeline is leaking, who actually ends up in charge? Let's look at political empowerment. Your sources track the share of parliamentary seats held by women.
In 1990, it was an abysmal 9.57%. By 2023, it has grown to 23.8%.
Okay, so mathematically, over 33 years, that is a 149% increase. That sounds like a big jump.
It is progress. Going from less than 10% to nearly a quarter of the parliament changes the nature of legislative debate. But we have to contextualize it. It still lags behind the global average, which sits at 26.54%.
Right. And frankly, given the education gap, it feels way too low. If 71% of the women have secondary education compared to only 56% of the men, you would expect the parliament to be majority female.
You really would.
They are literally the most educated demographic in the entire country. But the pipeline leaks before they can reach the halls of power.
The political arena is difficult to penetrate, but the most alarming trend in your entire data stack isn't actually the parliament seats. It's the labor force participation.
This part blew my mind. I had to read the chart twice to make sure I wasn't misunderstanding it. Over the last 30 years, labor force participation in Gabon has dropped. Not just stagnated, it actually dropped.
Yes.
And not just for women, for both genders.
This is a critical red flag for any economist looking at a nation's long-term viability. Let's look at the exact numbers. From 1993 to 2023, female labor force participation fell from 54.45% down to 39.66%.
So roughly 6 out of 10 working-age women are completely absent from the formal labor market.
Yes, and male participation fell from 71.16% down to 57.36%.
If you were listening to this and you run a business or you just understand basic household economics, you immediately see the crisis here. How do you sustain a country's economic growth when fewer and fewer of your adults are actually working?
It's nearly impossible.
If only roughly 40% of women and 57% of men have jobs in the labor force, who is running the country? Where's the money coming from?
This dual decline is absolutely terrifying. We have to ask why highly educated women are leaving or perhaps never even entering the workforce, and why are men dropping out right alongside them?
So what's the answer?
To understand this, we have to look at the macroeconomic structure of Gabon. Gabon is a petrostate. It is heavily reliant on natural resources, particularly oil, and to a lesser extent, timber and manganese.
Right. Extractive industries, you drill a hole or you chop down a tree and you export it.
Precisely. And extractive industries are notoriously capital-intensive, not labor-intensive.
Let's define that because it's the key to this whole mystery.
Think about it this way. If a country wants to build its economy on manufacturing, say, building a massive clothing export industry or electronics assembly, you need thousands and thousands of workers in factories, sewing, soldering, shipping, and managing logistics.
Right, you need a ton of bodies.
That is a labor-intensive economy.
Right.
Creates massive amounts of employment. But if you want to extract oil, you spend $2 billion on a deep-water offshore drill, some pipelines, and an export terminal.
Okay.
You only need a few hundred highly specialized engineers and technicians to run it. The oil generates billions of dollars in national wealth, but it doesn't require thousands of everyday workers.
So the wealth is generated by machines and a tiny sliver of experts rather than the sweat and labor of the general population.
Exactly. So you have a situation where the economy is generating a high gross national income, hence the $18,854 per capita we saw earlier, but it is fundamentally incapable of generating broad-based employment.
It's a complete mismatch. The state is running an education system that is producing a massive cohort of women with high school and some college education. They are primed for office jobs, tech jobs, service sector management, administration.
Yes, exactly.
But the economy is just a giant oil rig. It isn't creating the jobs that match the education profile of its citizens.
That is the ultimate tragedy of the resource curse. When a highly educated woman graduates, but the only major industry is offshore drilling or heavy timber extraction industries that are heavily male-dominated and require specific technical or physical capital, she literally cannot find a job that matches her skills.
Wow.
Combine that with the fact that she is navigating a society with an incredibly high adolescent birth rate and poor maternal health support, and the result is inevitable. She drops out of the formal labor market.
She either stays home or she moves into the informal economy.
Right, selling goods on the street, doing unregistered work, which isn't tracked in these official labor statistics and offers absolutely no Social Security or safety net.
And the fact that male participation is dropping from 71% down to 57% proves this isn't just a gender issue anymore. It's a complete failure of the economy to diversify.
Precisely.
The oil money is crowding out other industries. They aren't building a robust agricultural sector or a tech sector because the state revenue relies almost entirely on oil exports.
And this leads us to the most dangerous consequence of a capital-intensive, extractive economy. When only a small percentage of the population is working in the formal sector, but the country as a whole is making billions from oil, what happens to the money?
It inevitably concentrates in the hands of the few people, politicians, and multinational corporations controlling those specific industries. Which brings us to the next critical data point in your deep dive, the inequality tax and the faces of poverty.
This is where the UN metrics really force us to face reality. Earlier, we talked about Gabon's HDI being a solid 0.733, but your report introduces a modified version of this, the inequality-adjusted HDI, or the IHDI.
And when you apply that adjustment, Gabon's score gets absolutely decimated. It drops from 0.733 down to 0.558.
That drop represents a 23.8% loss in human development due to inequality. The best way to understand this is to think of the baseline HDI as the potential of the country.
Okay, potential.
If all the oil wealth, all the hospital beds, and all the school desks were distributed perfectly evenly to every citizen, their development would be a 0.733. But the IHDI represents the harsh reality on the ground.
It's an inequality tax. It's like you, the citizen, earn $1 of development for your country, But systemic unfairness and corruption take 24 cents right off the top before it ever reaches your community.
That's a great way to frame it. And the data breaks down exactly where that tax is being levied across the three dimensions. The biggest driver is income inequality, which causes a 31.42% loss in the income dimension.
That's huge.
Education inequality causes a 20.64% loss, and health inequality causes a 19.05% loss.
So the wealth is incredibly concentrated. The people at the top are living with first world health and wealth, while the rest are basically paying the inequality tax. And to show us the human face of that concentration, you provided the Multidimensional Poverty Index, the MPI.
The MPI is vital because it doesn't just look at who lives on less than $2 a day. Income alone doesn't really define poverty. The MPI looks at severe deprivations in health, education, and living standards at the household level. Do you have a dirt floor? Do you lack clean drinking water? Are your children out of school? Your data, based on 2021 numbers, shows that 8.6% of Gabon's population lives in multidimensional poverty.
Now, honestly, at first glance, 8.6% sounded relatively low to me compared to some other developing nations where that number can be 30 or 40%.
It is relatively low.
But what is deeply troubling is the primary driver of this poverty. The MPI breaks down what specific deprivations are hurting people the most. It is not a lack of consumer goods or a lack of a radio or a bicycle.
Yeah.
The number one contributor to multidimensional poverty in Gabon is nutrition.
Yes.
It contributes 26.0% to the MPI. The second highest is school attendance at 12.8%.
Let's just sit with that first metric.
Yeah.
Nutrition.
I mean, how does an oil country starve? Seriously, how can a country with a gross national income per capita of nearly $19,000, a country that is firmly in the upper middle income bracket globally, have a significant chunk of its population suffering primarily from malnutrition? It just doesn't compute. You can't be rich and malnourished at the same time.
It proves a profound economic paradox. The wealth absolutely exists in the country, but it is severely bottlenecked. And this ties everything we've discussed together.
Oh, so?
Because the economy is capital intensive and focused on exporting oil, the government has historically underinvested in domestic agriculture. Why grow food when you can pump oil, sell it for US dollars, and just import food?
Oh, wow. Okay, I see the trap.
Right. So the country imports its food, which makes it expensive. But remember the labor force participation rate. It's plunging.
Right, people don't have jobs.
So you have a population where a huge chunk of adults are not employed in the formal economy, meaning they don't have steady incomes, but they are living in a country where food is extremely expensive because it's imported. The profits from the extractive industries are not trickling down. They are captured by the elite. So the inequality tax hits the dinner table hardest.
It's a stark reminder that averages lie. An average income of $19,000 means absolutely nothing if a tiny elite holds millions, while the bottom 10% can't even secure enough daily calories. You can't eat oil.
It's the classic symptom of the resource curse, also known as Dutch disease. The top-line macroeconomic numbers look fantastic to foreign investors, but the structural foundations, public health, broad employment, equitable food distribution are rotting from the inside out.
Okay. Up to this point, the story of Gabon feels incredibly heavy. It's a story of squandered potential. We have this massive, incredible surge in female education, but it's being actively undermined by maternal health crises, teen pregnancy, a lack of diverse jobs, and severe calorie-depriving inequality.
It paints a bleak picture.
If this were a movie, this is the part where the protagonist looks totally defeated. But here is where the entire narrative flips on its head. Because despite these severe internal struggles, there is one area where Gabon is not just beating the global average, they are completely rewriting the rulebook for the rest of the planet.
This is the plot twist, and it is arguably the most important data in the entire report for the future of global policy. We are looking at a completely new index. The Planetary Pressures Adjusted HDI, or the PHDI.
Okay, I need you to explain this one slowly,
Yeah.
because this is the key to the riddle we posed at the very beginning of the show. What exactly is the PHDI?
Well, for decades, environmentalists criticized the UN's Human Development Index because it essentially rewarded countries for destroying the planet. Traditionally, how does a country buy high human development? How did the US or the UK or China get rich?
By building massive factories, burning millions of tons of coal, clear-cutting forests, and extracting endless amounts of steel and concrete.
Exactly. The HDI celebrated the wealth and health created by that industrialization, but completely ignored the ecological deficit it created. It didn't account for the fact that this development was mathematically unsustainable.
Right, it just looked at the short-term gains.
So recently, the UN created the PHDI to answer a fundamental question. What is the true planetary cost of a nation's human development? The PHDI takes a country's baseline HDI score and penalizes it based on two specific planetary pressures: carbon dioxide emissions per capita and material footprint per capita.
And the data you provided on Gabon is absolutely staggering. Let's look at the carbon emissions first. Gabon emits only 2.22 tons of CO2 per capita.
Let's compare that to the average.
The world average is 4.54 tons, so they're emitting less than half of the global average.
That alone is impressive. But the second metric, the material footprint, is even more revealing. The material footprint measures the sheer tonnage of stuff a nation consumes: biomass, fossil fuels, metal ores, and non-metallic minerals like sand and gravel for construction. Gabon's material footprint is only 4.44 tons per capita.
And the world average is a massive 12.71 tons. So Gabon is consuming nearly a third of the physical resources that the rest of the world uses.
So when we calculate the PHDI, we penalize every country in the world for their emissions and their footprint, and then we re-rank them.
And here's the grand reveal, the answer to our riddle. When you factor in these planetary pressures, when you adjust the global rankings to hold the industrialized nations accountable for the environmental damage they've caused to get rich, Gabon's global rank skyrockets.
It's an incredible jump.
They jump from 113th in the world all the way up to 64th. That is a jump of 49 places among the 166 ranked nations.
It is a massive statistical validation of their ecological policies. Look at the difference in the index values. When the UN applies the planetary pressure penalty, the world's overall HDI score drops by 10.05%.
Because everyone else is polluting so much.
Exactly. The wealthy, industrialized nations take a massive hit to their scores because their development is ecologically expensive. They are overdrawn on their planetary bank account.
But Gabon's HDI is barely touched. Their score only drops 3.96%.
Because they aren't overdrawn. It's like finding out the person driving the tiny, hyper-efficient hybrid car who meticulously recycles and composts everything is secretly living a highly developed, upper-middle-class life. They have successfully decoupled human progress from planetary destruction.
But wait, I have to push back here. How is this actually possible? We just spent 20 minutes talking about how Gabon is a petrostate.
We did.
Their entire economy is based on extracting and exporting oil and timber. How can an oil-producing nation be a green champion with half the carbon footprint of the global average? It doesn't make sense.
That is the ultimate nuance of global carbon accounting, and it's a testament to Gabon's specific domestic geography. First, carbon emissions in this index are measured by domestic consumption, not export.
Oh, I see.
When Gabon pumps oil and sells it to Europe, the emissions from burning that oil are counted against Europe because Europe is the one actually consuming the energy. But more importantly, Gabon is covered by the Congo Basin rainforest. Over 88% of their landmass is pristine, highly protected forest.
Ah, so they have a massive natural sponge.
Exactly. They have instituted incredibly strict conservation laws. They ban raw log exports to encourage local, sustainable processing, and they have designated massive swaths of land and ocean as protected national parks.
That's amazing.
As a result, their forests absorb vastly more carbon than their entire economy emits. They are one of the few countries on Earth that is a net carbon sink. They are literally cleaning up the mess made by the countries ranked above them in the traditional HDI.
That is mind-blowing. It is the ultimate counter-narrative to Western development. The industrialized world built its wealth on a model of ecological deficit. Gabon proves that you can achieve high human development and HDI of 0.733 with an incredibly light ecological footprint. They are an absolute global benchmark for green growth.
And this brings us to the crucial synthesis of all this data. How do we hold all these contradictory truths at once? We have a country with brilliant female education and world-leading environmental sustainability, but also a country where women are dying in childbirth, the workforce is shrinking, and 8.6% of the population is facing multidimensional poverty driven by malnutrition.
Which is exactly what you addressed in the outro of your report. You created this brilliant visualization, a radar chart, to map what you call the Gabon model. You mapped 6 axes: HDI, GDI, GII, IHDI, PHDI, and education equity.
If you visualize a radar chart or spider web chart, a perfectly balanced developed country would be a large, smooth circle. But Gabon's chart is jagged. You can clearly see the spikes and the dents.
The spikes, their absolute strengths, are jutting way out. Their near-perfect gender parity and basic capabilities, their world-leading planetary sustainability in the PHDI, and their phenomenal female education rates. Those are areas where Gabon is literally showing the rest of the world how it should be done.
But then you have the severe dents, the weaknesses pulling the shape violently inward, a devastating maternal and adolescent health crisis, plunging labor force participation for both men and women, and severe income inequality leading to malnutrition.
Right.
The radar chart beautifully summarizes the reality. Gabon is an environment-friendly, educationally progressive nation that is deeply crippled by structural health failures and wealth hoarding.
So if we are looking at this data not just as a history lesson, but as a roadmap, the
Yeah.
policy prescriptions become very clear.
Absolutely. Based purely on the metrics, there are 3 clear mandates for Gabon's future. First, targeted public health interventions are non-negotiable. The government must fix the maternal mortality and teen pregnancy pipeline.
Yeah, that has to be priority number one.
You cannot boast a 71% female secondary education rate while simultaneously having a teen pregnancy rate that is double the global average. The reproductive health infrastructure must be funded to catch up to the education infrastructure. You have to stop the leak in the pipeline.
Second, economic restructuring. They have to translate that massive female education advantage into actual labor force participation. You can't just rely on a capital-intensive oil and timber economy while 60% of your women sit outside the formal workforce.
It's completely unsustainable.
You have to build a diversified economy, services, sustainable agriculture, technology where these educated citizens can actually work. Broad-based employment is the only way to reduce that massive inequality tax and solve the nutrition crisis.
And finally, the third mandate. They must fiercely guard their low-carbon green growth model as they solve those first 2 issues. As they try to create jobs and grow their agriculture, the temptation will be to industrialize rapidly, to burn more, to extract more, to clear-cut the forests for quick cash. But their status as a global PHDI leader, their pristine rainforest, is their true geopolitical superpower.
Which leaves us with a lingering question, one that isn't explicitly answered by the UN data, but that you listening really need to think about. The entire industrialized world is currently spending trillions of dollars desperately trying to learn how to shrink its carbon footprint down to Gabon's level. We are trying to engineer our way back to the ecological balance that Gabon already possesses.
We really are.
But here is the catch. As Gabon tries to fix its internal economy, as they try to create jobs, reduce maternal mortality, and end malnutrition, will they be forced by the global market to adopt the rest of the world's destructive high-carbon habits? Or can they invent a completely new path forward?
That's the billion-dollar question.
A future where you don't need a massive, polluting, carbon-heavy industrial revolution just to ensure everyone gets fed and lives a long, healthy life. The data you provided maps out where they are, but the trajectory of where they go next might just dictate the future of sustainable development for the whole planet. What do you think happens next?